So good evening, everyone. For those who attended last week, you get to hear me all over again. For those who haven't, my name is Erich Weber, and I am the Economic and Business Advisor with the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. I know it's a tongue twister. So my role in the ministry is to provide resources for farmers and food processors dealing with financing, taxation, business structures, practically anything and everything underneath the sun. When I'm not working with the ministry, I do work with my dad on a farm in Southern Grey County. I don't know if we're big, but we focus on beef cattle and as well as a little bit of cash cropping as well. We would be considered to be probably a small to medium-sized operation, but still. But as you say, when you're dealing with family transitions, it's always a fun experience. But that's not tonight's discussion. We're going to talk about starting a farm in Ontario, and we're going to focus on livestock. So for tonight's agenda, it is a jam-packed session, so we're going to try and get through this as quickly and as efficiently as possible so that we can have some time at the end of the presentation for any sort of verbal questions or whatnot. Again, feel free, as Laurie mentioned, please, if you don't feel comfortable in asking questions in this type of forum, you can reach out to Grey Egg Services through Laurie and Emily, or you can reach out directly to myself. They're a great resource. Take advantage of it because starting a farm, if you're looking for a farm, or if you're already in it and you're just in it for the last couple of years, there's lots to learn. And I do know of people that have been farming for 40, 50 years and they're still learning. And that's just the joys of agriculture, that you never stop learning. So tonight we're going to break this presentation down into two main sections. So again, the first section is kind of a little bit of a nod to the presentation you would have received earlier, dealing with the general aspects of starting a farm, and as well as, with a little bit of a touch to livestock farming. And then at the second half, we're going to focus mainly on you've decided to do livestock farming. Let's go through kind of the process, what type of funding resources there are, record keeping, how to market, the different commodity organizations that are available to help, as well as any business risk management programs available. So let's get started. Let's jump on in. One quick comment I will make, you can read this on your own time. I believe you all have received a copy of the slides already. If not, we'll get that to you shortly. But long story short, what you see on the presentation slides tonight is just meant for background information. Before you make any decisions, please reach out to an accountant or a lawyer or an advisor or a mentor, somebody who can work with you on a one-on-one basis and walk you through the whole process. Because again, you are taking on a pretty big role and responsibility, and you want to make sure you understand what are the trials and tribulations that you may face. So just keep that in mind. Also, too, if you have listened to my presentation about general financial, the general aspects of starting a farm, that's great. If you have any questions about that tonight, please fire away when you're ready. If not, no, don't panic. You can look at that at your own time. But just so you know, some of the topics that we do cover, that we did cover in that presentation: business plans, general financing, obtaining land, taxation, general record keeping, and finding advisors. So just something to keep in mind. So as we get started, we're going to prepare to get into the livestock farming industry. So congratulations. So by starting a new farm, if you do not know, I'll just give a quick synopsis. The Farm Business Registration Program, or FBR, if you are a farmer that makes more than $7,000, you do have to register your farm business. And but as a new farmer, if you haven't met the $7,000 gross farm revenues, you're not eligible to participate in the program. And just a couple of quick comments. that when it comes to this program, the FBR program, it allows you to obtain more preferential property tax rate for your farm, as well as allows you to participate in certain cost share programs. So that's one of the reasons why people would want to get involved into this type of program. But if you haven't made that $7,000, are you up the creek without a paddle, so to speak, to not participate in those programs? Not necessarily. That's the short answer. What happens is that when you work with AgriCorps, who's the Crown corporation that you work with to register your farm business, they will ask you if you've met that $7,000 threshold. If you haven't, they'll start asking you questions as to what is your timeline for hitting that threshold? What's your plan? So you'll see here that on your screen that you have to inform AgriCorps of the situation. And something to keep in mind with a new farm business that you're looking into, sometimes the cash flows might be very uneven. So one year you might hit $7,000 threshold and the next year you may not. You have to keep reporting this year after year. So you'll be working with AgriCorps to develop a plan about how you can reach that threshold and then sustain that threshold. One quick comment I will make before we talk more about the plan is that if for religious reasons you do not want to participate or you cannot participate in the Farm Business Registration Program, you do have to file an objection to the Agriculture, Food, and Rural Affairs Appeal Tribunal, which is a tongue twister in itself. You can reach them at the number on your screen, and they'll walk you through the process as how you can file an objection. So as I alluded to earlier, if you did not meet that $7,000 threshold, AgriCorps is going to be asking you lots of questions, and they will ask for a plan of some kind that you have to submit to them. So the plan that you should be sending to them is why you haven't met that threshold. So, if it's just because of the fact that you're just starting, you're just, if you're in the cattle business or in the livestock business, you've bought some breeding stock. So if it's beef cows or sows or ewes or yos, depending on which way you want to pronounce it, or does for goats, and you need some time to go through that whole process of getting young stock back onto your farm and then ultimately selling them. That's a valid point. So you just have to be able to write that stuff down, the reason why and how you plan on obtaining that $7,000 gross farm revenue. So are you expecting to sell any sort of livestock or crops within the next year or 6 months, or how you ultimately get to it? So as well as, it doesn't hurt to put as much information as possible into this type of plan. So, how many head of livestock you're planning on selling, what type of price you're looking at, and then also to just a timeline as to how you're going to meet that goal. So if this is a situation that you're into, best thing for you to do is to contact AgriCorps as soon as possible using the telephone number on your screen, and then they will be able to walk you through the whole process, and so that you can get the paperwork in on time, because like everything else, it does take time to get that going. So switching gears, we're going to move into the new entrant program for supply managed commodities. So as you may or may not know, when you're just starting out in the livestock industry, there are supply managed industries. So that's your dairy cattle, that's your chickens, your eggs, turkeys. Those are industries or commodities that are supply managed. So that means that you would have to obtain quota for a specific price that is outlined through the different commodity organizations or through the fair through the market. So so that's one thing you have to be mindful of. And then also too, when you're dealing with supply managed commodities, you're also going to know how much money you're going to be receiving on a regular basis when you start selling your products. So if you're selling milk or chickens or eggs, you know kind of what revenue streams you're going to receive, and then ultimately you know where that's going to go. If it's going to go to for instance, a Gailey dairy plant or Broom Bray egg sorting facility or grading facility. So with that being said, as you can probably all know, that buying land is a very expensive and tough aspect of starting a farm. But if you are interested in getting involved in a supply and managed commodity, and with quota being as expensive as it is, it's one of those things where it can get very difficult to obtain. So depending on the supply managed commodity that you're looking into, it will depend on what type of new entrant programs that they may have. Some supply managed commodities may not have any. So before you get started, one of the first things you should do is you should be reaching out to that supply managed commodity. So like Dairy Farmers of Ontario, Chicken Farmers of Ontario, Egg Farmers of Ontario, and Turkey Farmers of Ontario, and ask if they have these types of programs. So, and if they do, some of the requirements that you might face to participate into these programs, usually you'll have to provide a written business plan to them. Usually there will be an application that you have to complete and fill out when you have a chance. And then also too, depending on the amount of quota they are willing to provide to you or have available to provide to new entrants, there's usually an interview process as well, where there's a panel that is decided by the commodity organization who sits on it. And then ultimately with these three factors, they'll go and say, yes, we feel comfortable in providing you or this new entrant entrance into this new entrant program, or no, you're not eligible at this point in time. So depending on the commodity that you're working in, will depend on what each new entrant program is. So just in generality, when it comes to new entrant programs, usually there is some form of quota that you will be able to receive. And also too, it's not just the quota, but they'll also allow you to pay that out over a period of time. So I believe with Chicken Farmers of Ontario, I think it's a 15-year timeline, so 15-year timeline. Where with dairy farmers, I think that they are more so into, they're willing to match up to like 20 kilos of quota. And then after that, then they'll have the conversation of you may have 5, 10, 15 years to repay that. But again, as I said, you should always reach out to the different commodity organization and find out what the true specific details are.
Eric,
in addition, yep.
Just wondering, I don't know a lot about the poultry and turkey and stuff.
Yep.
How big are you before you have to actually get a quota for chickens, turkeys, or eggs?
That's a very good question. So, when it comes to, I know with chicken and eggs, I'm not too sure with turkey, but with chickens, if you are planning on using the meat for your family, so like for family consumption, you can have up to 300 birds a year. Now with chicken farmers, there's also another program called the Artisan Program, and that allows you to have between 600 and 3,000 birds a year for meat purposes. And those birds you can sell at a farmer's market, or within your local grocery store if you're if there's a small grocery store in your community, or on farm sales. But again, that's without needing any sort of quota. For eggs, the limit is 100 laying hens. So as long as you have 99 laying hens, you do not need quota. So that's a very good question. One quick comment I will make too before we move on also too is that with the new entrant program, they will usually pair you up if you are accepted. They will usually pair you up with some form of mentorship, mentor coach, and as well as giving you some training so that you can be the best farmer available. So if you are interested in the supply managed industry, there's the links to your different new entrant programs that I was able to find. Egg Farmers of Ontario, they did have a new entrant program, but all the information was relating back to 2014, so I'm unsure if that still exists or not. So please, if you are looking at the egg industry and you're looking at getting involved in quota, reach out to the different commodity organizations and find out what the different options are. So switching gears again, we're kind of bouncing all over the place here, but again, some more food for thought. So with any sort of livestock, you have to also think about forage and feed testing. So if you are unsure, the reality is that when you're dealing with any sort of livestock, you want to make sure you have the best value for your feed dollar. So by not having your feed tested or formulated what's the word I'm looking for? Reviewed by a nutritionist to create a balanced diet for your livestock, you could be not taking may not be as efficient with your feed dollar as you might be, as you could be, I should say. So first off is that when you're dealing with any sort of forage or feed testing, working with a feed nutritionist is key. So a couple of places you can find, and I'm not too sure where everybody's from. So if you're in Grey or Bruce County, it might be a different story than if you're in here in Perth or further a distance. But usually your local feed mills will have a nutritionist on site, as well as any sort of agriculture supply store. So I'm referring to any sort of co-ops or grow marks. They will usually have a feed nutritionist on hand that they'll be willing to walk you through the whole process and ultimately formulate a ration that will best suit your needs. So here's a list that you can look at for labs that are able to do any sort of forage and feed testing, as well as going into more in depth about the benefits of testing your forage and feed. It is mainly focused on beef, but at the same time, though, the concept is still valid throughout all different livestock sectors. So if it's beef or hogs or chickens or dairy or whatnot, it's still worth the read just to give you an idea of what having a balanced feed ration is, how it can benefit your operation. So moving on, and I know, again, lots of information are being thrown at you, so I apologize, but there was lots of things to think about. The Ontario Wildlife Damage Compensation Program. So if you have any livestock on your farm, whether, as you say, if it's one animal or if it's 100 animals or 1,000 or whatever the size might be, you're always at risk of any sort of wildlife damage or death due to wildlife. So this program, it's an Ontario program that will provide you compensation for any sort of livestock that does die due to wildlife. You have to, one of the key aspects of this program is you have to take all reasonable actions to prevent predation. So reasonable, I realize, is a pretty generic term. If you have any sort of specific questions, I'd be reaching out to any sort of agriculture supply stores. So again, the co-ops, because they will have some form of predation solutions available for any sort of livestock that you may have, and they'll be able to kind of walk you through what would be considered reasonable. We'll get into how to apply for compensation a little bit later. Next slide, I guess it would be. But or actually it's this slide right here, that if you find that you have any livestock that has died due to any sort of wildlife, each municipality will have an investigator that you have to contact, and I believe the rule is 48 hours. But I'll have the link for you to take a look at, so you can look at the rules a little bit more closely. And then ultimately the municipal investigator, they will work with you through the application to determine if the livestock was truly killed due to any sort of wildlife, and then what type of wildlife would have done the damage. Because in this type of program, there are eligible livestock that qualify if they do die. So I'm referring to, just simplistically here, your beef, any sort of cattle, chickens, hogs, sheep, goats, etc. That's a pretty long list, but just for the time's sake, those are kind of the four main areas. And then also too, there's also a list of eligible wildlife damage. So that'd be more so like damage due to coyotes, damage due to foxes, I believe it's ravens, and et cetera, et cetera. Again, there's a long list that you can look through on your own time. But anywho, so the municipal investigator, they will complete the application for you on your behalf, as well as take any pictures of the damage, and then they will ultimately, you will ultimately then submit that, sign the application, and submit it to OMAFRA for processing. And one major aspect of this program, just when we're talking about farm business registration numbers, you must have a farm business registration number to apply for this program, and you also must have a premise identification number, and we'll get talking about that shortly. If you want more information about this program, there's a link on your slides there that you can then review. Hopefully, fingers crossed, you don't have to apply for this program. Hopefully you're not dealing with any sort of wildlife damaging your livestock, but in the case that happens, there's a program there available for you to use and to get compensated for.
Do they compensate differently based on like different claims, Eric, or is it always the same?
So when it comes to compensation, the ministry has a list that they're willing to compensate for, and it's really based on what type of animal has been damaged or has been lost. So as you say, and beef animal that like a calf that's a couple of days old would be compensated differently than market animal that's just about to go to an abattoir. So it really depends on the species of livestock, as well as what type of life, like what type of age they are at. So it really depends, and that's ultimately done at the ministry level. So moving on, we were mentioning about mentioned earlier about the premise identification number. So the premise identification number is a way to assign a unique number to all parcels of land that is used in growing and raising any sort of agricultural products or any sort of food processing. PID, as it's known, is mainly used for traceability. So if there's any sort of issues in the system, they are able to drill down on which I don't know how to really describe it, but it's more so that by having a premise ID identification number, you can then determine if there's any sort of issues. So like, as you say, if you have any sort of wildlife damage and disease gets involved, you can kind of pinpoint where that has all happened. And that's where the premise identification number program takes into effect. So one thing when it comes to the PID number is that it's linked to your municipal roll number. So on your property taxes, if you own a farm parcel, you'll have a roll number that ultimately would get linked to your premise ID. And then also too, as I mentioned here, that some government programs like the Ontario Wildlife Damage Compensation Program, they require it as well as commodity organizations. So one commodity organization that I know of that requires this is the Ontario pork. So when it comes to raising any sort of pigs on your farm, and if you are moving pigs from one farm to another farm, or one barn to another barn, or from your barn to an abattoir, you have to record all these movements. And then ultimately, the way to do that is through this premise identification number program. So what you
Eric?
need, yep.
There's a question that I have in the chat. Can you have two farm business registration numbers for one property?
So the farm business registration number is tied to you personally. To participate into the farm property tax class program, for instance, all you really need is just one farm business registration number. But with that being said, depending on your business structure, if you are a partnership, for instance, like you're registering as a partnership, each individual would have a farm business registration number. So if you look at a husband or wife team or a spousal team, one would have one farm business registration number, another one would have a different farm business registration number. But as I mentioned earlier, you really just need one farm business registration number per property, so to speak, so that, and I should revise, you need one valid farm business registration number. And what I mean by valid, I mean farm business registration that has been paid on time, as well as has met that $7,000 gross farm revenue threshold. So you really just need one.
Thank you.
So going back to the premise identification program, just a quick comment here. There's no cost to register your program, register your premise identification number. It's relatively easy to do it. You can see on the screen here the website, as well as you can call Agricor at the number below there, and they'll walk you through the process. Main thing you do need is your municipal roll number. If you don't, there are ways to get around it. Usually they use like latitude and longitude aspects or coordinates of your farm. But ideally, if you have a municipal roll number, or you have access to the municipal roll number, giving that information is easiest and best. So switching gears, so where to find a veterinarian? So the joys of livestock is, well, I don't want to call it joys, but the reality is when you're dealing with livestock, you're usually dealing with sick livestock as well. Hopefully minimized, hopefully maybe once or twice in a career, but we know that's pretty impossible. But the reality is that veterinarian is a key advisor, a key tool in your toolkit to have run a successful livestock operation, whether it be for beef or sheep or dairy or chickens or hogs or whatever. Veterinarian's good to have in your back pocket. So the idea with the veterinarians, again, they can provide any sort of advice and support. If you have any questions, if you have any animals on your farm that look sick or are sick, or you're having a run of bad luck and you need to get a post-mortem done to see what's happening to your livestock, they will be able to help you and arrange that for you, as well as the antibiotics and vaccinations. They have access to those key devices that you can use within your livestock operation. One quick comment when it comes to veterinarians is that, especially for antibiotics, if that is something that you're planning on using on your farm, that there are certain antibiotics that you must get a prescription for. In order for you to get a prescription, your veterinarian that you're working with has to be on your farm at least once a year. So make sure that when you are getting started in the livestock operation or livestock industry, that you find a veterinarian that you feel comfortable with and that you're willing to have that client veterinarian relationship with, because ultimately they have a vast resource of options and solutions to keep your livestock healthy. and you want to make sure that if you're planning on using any sort of antibiotics, that you can have access to that tool. So one additional thing when it comes to finding a veterinarian, you may have heard in the news that veterinarians are large animal, or I believe they're now called food veterinarians, or food livestock veterinarians, are getting hard to come by. But with that being said, talk to your neighbors or your prospective neighbors if you haven't bought any farmland as of yet. See who they recommend. Again, the good old-fashioned word of mouth is the best tool I find when you're trying to find a resource like a veterinarian, accountant, lawyer, etc. Also, too, another option you can utilize is the College of Veterinarians of Ontario. They have a listing of all licensed veterinarians in their college. So you can see on your screen there's the link to that website where you can go through, search for local veterinarians in your area, and then come back with some options to do maybe an interview process or whatnot, depending on your situation, and see which veterinarian will work best in your situation. Okay. So that was a lot of information I've thrown at you for the first bit of the course tonight, or webinar tonight. I don't know if there's any additional questions coming in on the chat or not, but we can move forward, and we're doing good for timing so far, I think so.
I don't see anything in the chat at this moment, Eric.
Excellent. And again, if you do have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll get those questions answered down the road. So as you say, now we're going to focus more on the business of livestock farming. So we're going to be looking at, your financing, record keeping, cost production, etc. So we'll get started and look at your financing options for livestock farming. So just as a precursor for people who attended the crop seminar or webinar last week, you'll see some of the slides will be kind of the same. So the first couple of slides here will be the same as last week, but then we'll get into more livestock specific a little bit short later on. So just stay tuned, just bear with me as we go through. So and the first presentation that you would have seen as part of this program, when we're talking about general financing or your general starting a farm business in Ontario, we do talk about different financing options, so like mortgages, term loans, well, not term loans, I should say, but mortgages through different third-party mortgages or family mortgages or loans. We're now going to focus on what you will deal with on a day-to-day basis. So in this first part of financing options, we're going to look at lines of credit, any sort of term loans, and also leases. So first off, line of credit. When it comes to lines of credit, the idea of this product is to give you the flexibility to cover any short-term cash flow shortages. So what I'm referring to is that when you're dealing in the livestock sector, and again, picking on beef, because it seems like a lot of people are interested in beef. When you have, if you're looking at buying in any sort of feeder cattle, for instance, that's a fair chunk of change that you have to pay out to buy those cattle. So with using a line of credit, you can go into this line of credit where you can pull money out to buy the cattle, and then in 6, 8, 12 months after the fact, when they are ready to be sold, either as a market animal or to a feedlot, then you can sell them, and then you take that money and you can pay off any amount that you borrowed on your line of credit. So that's the idea of having a line of credit. It's again, You can withdraw or you can replenish it as often or as little as you want. You have that flexibility. Usually when it comes to a line of credit, you're given a maximum amount that you can withdraw. So it could be as much as or as little as 10,000, 15,000, or $1 million, depending on your size of operation. Most likely in your situations, you're not going to be dealing with $1 million line of credit, but maybe down the road you might. It depends on your situation. When it comes to interest, it is on the outstanding balance, and that's calculated on a daily basis. And again, it will be on a variable interest rate. It's not fixed like a term loan or a lease, so keep that in mind. When it comes to lines of credit, as I mentioned, interest is variable, but the idea is that you have the flexibility of withdrawing money at any time, as well as replenishing it or paying down that debt as anytime as you want. But there are monthly fees that you'll have to deal with when it comes to having lines of credit. And again, the key thing here is that the line of credit is really meant for any sort of temporary cash flow shortfall. So like, as I mentioned earlier, about paying off any sort of cattle that you plan on turning around and selling within 12 months, any sort of, expenses like, property taxes or telephone bills, so you can use that to on your line of credit. And then ultimately, as I said, usually the idea of a line of credit, you're factoring in a 12-month turnaround. So you might withdraw money in January, but then the idea is that in December, when the livestock sold, you'll take that money, pay down your line of credit, and then whatever you have left over, you can use for whatever purposes your operation requires. Term loans, on the other hand, vary slightly in the sense that they span over a 5 to 10 year period, depending on the situation. The idea of a term loan is for purchasing any sort of assets, so like tractors, haying equipment, etc. They can have a variable interest rate or a fixed rate depending on the options that are available to you. And again, when it comes to term loans, payments are made on a very regular basis, and they are usually stipulated or outlined at the beginning of the loan that that you're planning on using. Again, so as I mentioned with lines of credit, you're dealing with usually monthly fees with your line of credit, but with term loans, there's usually a one-time fee for like registering the loan, and that's usually happens at the beginning of the contract. Throughout the life of the term loan, there's no additional fees in most cases. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the idea of these term loans, they're really meant for like purchasing equipment or any sort of livestock that might be around for a couple of years. So again, in the case of beef cattle or dairy cattle, like any sort of cows or sows, any sort of female breeding stock, you could use that for some of the term loans. You can finance those types of livestock using term loans if you would like. Your term loan might it may not be a 10-year term loan. It might be maybe a 5-year or 4-year term loan, depending on the situation. But again, that's the idea of a term loan. Leases, very similar to term loans, but the reality is that you do not necessarily own that piece of equipment. The leasing company will, and that's only when the lease is in force or is in progress. When it comes to the normal lifespan of a lease, you're looking at 3 to 7 years based on equipment. Again, leases are mainly for equipment. You very rarely would see, you would not see any sort of leasing on any sort of livestock, but you could see it on some building opportunities. So like any sort of sheds or barns, you might be able to do some leasing, but again, that depends on the leasing company that you're working with. When it comes to equipment, most leasing companies, they will have kind of a maximum age that they're willing to lease any sort of equipment for. So, and sad thing is that if you're looking at equipment that's greater than 20 years old, so that's only in the this millennium, are the only pieces of equipment that you could ultimately lease, depending on the leasing company that you're working with. So, so keep that in mind. Interest, when you're talking about leases, it is fixed compared to a line of credit where it's usually variable. Leases are usually fixed, but you will notice in some cases that interest is more expensive compared to a term loan. So just keep that in mind. When we're looking at the lifespan of a lease, so the start of the lease, you will have a down payment as well as a security deposit that you have to put down to get the ball rolling for having a lease. Throughout the life of the lease, you're dealing with bi-weekly all the way up to semi-annual payments, depending on what you agree on with the leasing company. So you could do it on a bi-weekly basis, monthly basis, semi-annual basis, quarterly basis. The sky's the limit. One aspect of the lease that is a little bit more attractive in some cases, payments are tax deductible. So it will bring down your agriculture farm income, or you can use this lease payments to bring that money down. So that might be beneficial to you. But again, once you get into that, before you make a decision, talk to your accountant and see if that's something that you really need for your income tax situation. One thing I will mention is that when you're dealing with leases, lease payments, they are HST. There's HST on them, so keep that in mind. That if you're registered for HST, you will get that money back, but it might be only when you'll only get that back when you file your return. So that could be quarterly, monthly, or in most cases on a yearly basis. So keep that in mind. At the end of the lease, you have two options. You can return the lease to the leasing company. So quite literally, if you're using a lease to buy a tractor or to use a tractor, at the end of the lease term, if you don't want to use it anymore, you tell the leasing company that you're done with it, and they'll pick it up, and they will check it over. And if there's any major repairs that need to be made on it, they'll charge you a fee for it. But otherwise, you're done. You can just walk away, and everything's good. You can go to do something else. The one thing about leases, you do have a buyout option. So at the beginning of the lease, when you're signing the paperwork, they will outline how much money you would have to pay in addition to your normal payments to buy out that piece of equipment. It can be as low as $1, but most cases when it comes to leases, you're looking at maybe 10% of the value of that asset or that piece of equipment. One thing I did not put on here, but just as a third part, a third option when it comes to at the end of the lease, you do have the option to keep on paying the payments that you've been making throughout the life of the lease. After you've done that 60 months or 72 months or 48 months, whatever the life of the term is, you can still keep making those payments and still use the piece of equipment, but it would not necessarily change the buyout option. So you really just be into a rental agreement at that point in time. So that is a third option. Is it the best option? That really depends on the situation. So lots of key options for your general livestock financing options. So we talked about lines of credit, term loans, and leases. We're going to then switch gears into the tile drainage loan program. So I realize that this is not crops night, but the reality is that when it comes to livestock farmers, you usually have some form of cropland that you need to feed use to feed your livestock, right? So so I kept this slide in from previous webinar with regards to the tile drainage loan program. So the idea of this program is to provide funding for you, the farmer, to tile drain your land. You can do this over a 10-year period, or get a finance for over a 10-year period. Payments are made annually, and the interest rates are ultimately set by OMAFRA, and they're supposed to be competitive with other financing options that are available. One major aspect of this program that you have to keep in mind is that to have the tiling cost eligible for this program, you have to first use a licensed tile drainage operator. You can find a list if you Google licensed tile drainage operators of Ontario. You can figure out which options are available for you, or you can reach out to your municipal office, because ultimately you are going to get that loan application and then submit it through your municipal office. And as I mentioned on the screen, 75% of all eligible costs can be financed. So it's a good tool for you if you have some land that you need to tile. And if you don't want to go back to the bank or your lender, this is another option available. Next on the list, advanced payment program. So again, if you're on Crops Night, you would have heard me talk about it. So the advanced payment program, it is a program that you can finance both crops and livestock. I know other financing options we talked about last week were just crop specific, but the advanced payment program, you can use either way. So just as a quick reminder for those who have heard this already, for those who haven't, so it's administered through the Agriculture Credit Corporation, or ACC. Maximum loan amount is $1 million. Most likely in your case, you're not necessarily going to utilize this if you're just starting out, but it's something for you to have just in case, if depending on how you grow your operation. Normally, the first $100,000 is interest-free, whereas the remaining $900,000 is usually a prime rate of interest. But for the last 2 years, for 22 and for 23, the interest-free portion has been increased to $250,000 from the $150,000 or $100,000, I should say. Sorry. I'm not too sure at this point in time whether or not this will continue forward. If the interest-free portion will stay at $250,000 for future years, or if they're going to revert back, or maybe they'll choose another option. I'm not too sure. So stay tuned. When it comes to amounts that you can get financed through ACC, you can go onto their website. So again, Google Agriculture Credit Corporation, and they have a document on their website that lists out what they will be willing to finance for different aspects of your operation. So if it's crops, it'll list that out, as well as livestock. So usually what they factor for a financing amount, they usually factor about 50% of the marketable value. So if I'm not mistaken, I took a look at the rates this morning. I believe for 500-pound steer, I believe they're willing to finance about $800 to $900 per head. But again, I would strongly suggest you taking a look at that document, or you can call them 1-888-278-8807, and they'll walk you through that whole process as well, in terms of how they calculate how much you can get financed. And then they'll go through the application process in terms of what documents you need to show them or send to them, as well as they'll fill out the application, and then you'll just sign, and then ultimately, if everything goes through, they'll deposit the funds into your bank account, and then you can pay off some bills that you that are related to the livestock that you got financed.
Eric, there's a question in the chat. Clayton says, what if you only need 50,000, just interest free?
Yep. So as long as you're under that, well, and this year, 250,000, but in previous years, 100,000, as long as you're under that amount, it is interest free. One comment I will make is that there is an administration charge. I believe it's about $675. But beyond that, there's no, it's interest free other than that. So it is a pretty attractive option for financing any sort of your inputs, if it's crop inputs or livestock inputs. And we'll get into how you can utilize this program with the feeder finance program. We'll get talking about shortly. But yeah, no, it is a good tool to have in your toolkit, especially when it comes to financing.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Good question. So again, as I mentioned, ACC will go through the application process with you, and they will pretty much walk you through, and it's relatively painless. They'll ask you some hard-hitting questions, but it's relatively painless, so it's a good option. So switching gears, so we're now going to focus a little bit more on the beef sector, because there's a few more financing options for the beef world. So if you're not planning on raising any beef cattle, you may want to just bear with us for the next couple of slides, but we'll get started anyways. So the Beef Breeder Cooperative Program, so there's 8 beef breeder cooperatives around the province. There's 2 in Grey Bruce. I believe there's 1 in here that focuses on Huron, Perth, and Middlesex. But we'll show you the link to where you can review whichever cooperative is closest to you. The idea of this program is to give you financing, or allow you to obtain financing to purchase any female breeding stock, so your cows or your heifers. Depending on what you are going to finance, determines the length of term of the loan. So the maximum term for a bred cow, so a cow that has calved more than once, is 5 years. And the maximum term, if you're planning on purchasing a bred heifer that has not had a calf yet, you're looking at 6 years. Now that may change depending on the cooperative that you're working with. They may have additional rules in terms of they may have, you may be only allowed to do 4 years or 3 years, depending on the situation. But the maximum term is 5 years for bred cows, 6 years for bred heifers. The interest rate is on a variable basis, and each cooperative may have a different interest rate. So before you get involved, reach out to your different breeder cooperatives and ask what the interest rate is, and see what's your best option. Also too, there's a security deposit or an equity share, if you want to call it, of 15% as the absolute minimum that you have to provide. So just keep that in mind when you are looking at these beef breeder financing cooperatives. So when it comes to repayments of the loan, you can have it, you have 2 options. Either when the calf from that cow has been sold, you have to repay, or whenever you hit the annual payment deadline. That's usually done in December, but it may vary depending on the cooperative, and it's whichever one comes first. So if you had a calf that you decide to sell in November, then you would have to pay the loan in November. But if that calf is sold in the following January or February, then you have to make the payment by December, by the annual payment deadline. So just keep that in mind. Also too, in order for you to obtain any sort of financing, you have to become a member of that local beef breeder co-op, and you're only allowed to have 1 membership. You're only allowed to be a member of 1 beef breeder cooperative in the province. You cannot have 2 or 3. You cannot be a member of 2 or 3 different cooperatives. You're only allowed to be with one. For more information about this program, as well as getting a listing and contact information for the different beef breeder financing cooperatives out there across the province, go on the link on your screen there, and then you'll be able to read through the program and then figure out who's the best option to talk to. The feeder cattle loan financing program, so very similar to the beef breeder co-op program. Again, in this case, you're only financing or helping to purchase feeder cattle. That can be cattle that are going to be background. So you're looking at buying cattle in that 500-pound range and then taking them up to 7, 8, 9, 1,000-pound range, or you can take them up to the full market weight of 1,600 pounds. You can also use this program if you're looking at getting involved in veal. That's another option that you can for financing a veal operation. So again, similar to the beef breeder cooperative program, you must be a member of your local feeder cooperative. They are 2 separate cooperatives, so just keep that in mind. Being a member of one does not automatically give you a membership in another one, so just keep that in mind. The repayment of the loan is either when the cattle are sold or when the 1-year term is up. So you can have financing up to a year for these cattle, and it's whichever one comes first. So as I mentioned earlier, if you have cattle for 6 months and you decide to sell them, you have to write the check, or the auction market will then write the check to the cooperative, and then you will get the difference. And hopefully you will get a check back. In the case that you are short, then you ultimately have to come up with that additional funds and pay off that loan. Or as you say, if you have bought cattle and you have held them for more than a year, you have to get those cattle, the loan that was used to finance those cattle, that has to be paid off by that 1-year mark. So just keep that in mind. You can finance 100% of the cattle purchase, but you also have to provide a 5% security deposit. So just keep that in mind. And interest rate is usually prime minus 1/4, and it's variable. But again, reach out to your different cooperatives, as each cooperative might have a slightly different interest rate. As mentioned, again, here's the link on your screen for you to learn more about the program, as well as getting a listing of all the different feeder cattle loan any feeder cattle financing cooperatives in the province. You can get a listing as well as their contact information. So if you're interested in getting involved in the sheep industry, we have a program here that just got started back in September 1st, 2022, and it's held in conjunction with Ontario Sheep Farmers and Scotia Bank. So the idea of this program is to help sheep farmers who have been in the business for at least 2 years. So this is a program that you may not be eligible if you're just getting started in the sheep industry. But the idea is that to help the new farmers and the experienced farmers to expand their flock. So you can either purchase used, or you can purchase any feeder lambs, depending on your situation or your operation. The maximum credit that you can obtain is $50,000, and it's at an interest rate of prime plus 2.95%. So that's the interest rate. So it is variable. So keep that in mind. When it comes to payment, the deadline to make the payment to completely cover the outstanding balance that you have as of August 31st is February 28th. So just keep that in mind. And based on my assessment, or based on my review of the program, they do not have a similar requirement like the beef breeder cooperatives or the feeder finance cooperatives, where if you sell any sort of livestock that is financed, you must pay off the loan first. Here, I think there's a little bit more flexibility, but if you want to get more information and how to apply, please look at the link on your screen, or click on the link on your screen, and or simply just Google Ontario Sheep Farmers and Scotiabank Yield More Financing Program, and that will lead you to the right area where you can get more information. Well, I think we're just past 8 o'clock. If you're okay, Lori, I think it would not be a bad idea to take maybe a 5-minute break for people to stretch their legs, stretch their arms, run away, get a drink or a snack, and then we'll continue on afterwards, if that's okay with you, Lori.
Sounds great, Eric. So about, my watch says it's about 8:01. So back in 5 minutes, about 8:06 or so then.
Sounds good.
Okay, we'll see you all back then. I got a tea delivered, so that was service.
I have a question. So you're saying that there's a like 5 or 6 year period on the cow finance program, some of
Yep.
them.
Yep.
So do they figure that out because they think that that's how long it'll take you, like, you know, how many calving cycles it'll take you to make your money back, or
I hope
or are they
not.
giving you grace to like make some
No, I think the idea is to let me just get back on here. Let me just get back on here. No, I think the idea is to give the farmer a chance to make money, right?
Get some
Because
profit.
ultimately, when you're looking at $2,000-3,000 a head for a bred cow, well, based on this market right now, really after the first calf, if you take that calf from birth all the way to market weight, you could, and if you weren't paying any sort of feed cost or anything like that, time, fuel, all that fun stuff, just the value of that calf would pay for the cow, the bred cow, right? But the idea is to kind of, spread that out so that people have the chance to, because again, mortgage payments, feed bills, all that fun stuff have to ultimately get paid too. So I would think that depending on the situation, depending on how much you're paying for a cow and what the market's doing, I would think that really you might just need maybe 3 years, maybe 4 years tops. But again, each operation is different. So
cool. And then hopefully you're able to keep some heifers from her as well.
well, and that's it. And as you say, with the beef breeder cooperative, you can finance home raised heifers as well. So that's another option available. Is that if you have a group of good cracking, good heifers that you like to breed back, you could ultimately get that financed through them. And then in that case, then you can get them financed for over a 6-year term. And one thing I did not mention on the slide, when it comes to bred heifers, the first year is an interest-only year. You don't have to pay any principal. It's just whatever the interest costs were for that loan. That's all you have to pay for. And then for years 2 to 5 is the principal plus interest. So,
Cool.
so one thing I will say just briefly is that usually there are some minimums. So you like one cow may not make a lot of sense to get financed through a beef breeder cooperative, but 10, 15, depending on your operation and your scale, is quite reasonable and quite doable, right? So
Cool.
I think that's basically our 5 minutes, Eric. If you
Sure.
wanted to start back up again, if you're ready for that.
Yep. Well, and again, if anybody has missed any part of this presentation, it is recorded. So don't worry if you if you haven't hurried back, you can always replay this recording and pick up any spot that you might have missed. So welcome back again for everyone. So we are definitely in the second half of this seminar or webinar tonight. And next on the list is livestock record keeping. One thing I will mention before we get started, I have 2 examples here for livestock record keeping. One comment I will make is that you can make it as extensive as you want or as limited as you want. So if you listen to the first part of this presentation, when we're talking about general aspects of starting a farm operation, we do talk about record keeping and the difference between electronic records, physical records, which option you should use, as well as what type of information you should collect. I will say that any sort of record keeping, the best thing for or to have good record keeping is where you're collecting information that you can utilize or analyze on a regular basis. So the first one I'm going to talk about today is birthing records. And then the second one, I believe it's treatment records. But the reality is that depending on your operation, you can have it down to, weight gains, how much are your livestock gaining if you're into the meat industry. So like beef cattle, hogs, sheep and goats. But as long as you have that information, if you record it, and if you're going to go and analyze that information, it's all the power to you, because the more information you know, the better off you as a farm business operator will be. So we'll talk about birthing records first off. So again, the idea of having any sort of birthing records, and again, I just use, lamb, calf, kids, and piglets. But again, depending on if you're looking at chickens or any sort of other livestock, turkey, etc. The idea of this type of a record is to determine how the mother has performed and how is the calf doing. So again, is there any health issues or is there any issues in general that has happened? So as a beef farmer myself, some of the things that I would be interested in when I'm recording my birthing records are, were there any health issues related to the calf? Well, how was the mother? What was the temperament of the mother of the cow? Was the cow a situation where you kind of hoped and prayed that you would get out alive, or was she a tame cow that you could go in and be able to work with the calf and not fear for your life? So if you recorded that type of information, you can then utilize that information down the road and say, okay, this cow gave birth to this calf, or this mother gave birth to this offspring, and we like how the calf or the kid or the lamb or the piglets are doing, so we want to keep that genetic line going. Or there is issues, so it's time to maybe decide to call that animal and send it down the road. So again, some examples that you can have in your birthing records. So again, you want to make sure that you have the ID numbers. If you have identification tags for your different livestock, so from the dam or from the ewe, the cow, the doe, the sow, as well as the ID tag of the offspring, so your lamb, calf, kid, piglets. By having that information as a baseline, then you can be able to mix and match whatever type of information you want to record. So like, were there any birthing issues? How was the health of the offspring? Was it an animal that was nursing, was first to nurse, or was it an animal that was, was the offspring, this one offspring maybe a little bit slower to nurse, right? So just by recording that information, you can make some key decisions as to, how that animal is going to perform in your farming operation down the road. Other aspects that you can record, I have mentioned here with the treatment records. So again, the idea is to outline which animals are sick and what they were treated with. You'll see more of this in the different quality assurance programs that are out there. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later on in the presentation. But the reality is that treatment records are becoming a very important tool for farmers. Again, one aspect when you're using any sort of antibiotics or vaccinations are your withdrawal times. So you'll get that information either through the vet or through reading the medical label on the vaccine or the antibiotic jar. So by recording this information, you know which animal can leave your property or go to that abattoir, go through an auction market, because you do not want to be sending an animal that is within that withdrawal time and it gets processed, and that's a whole kettle of fish that nobody wants to deal with. So by recording that information is key to prevent those types of mix-ups. So some of the items that you would see in a treatment record are: when was the treatment administered? What was the treatment? So what type of antibiotic or what type of vaccination was used? How the treatment was administered? Was it in the muscle, underneath the skin? And some treatment records, depending on if it's on a animal per animal basis, they'll have a diagram of the animal, and then you can pinpoint where that treatment took place. If it was in the neck or in the rear and the hip, and especially if you have any sort of broken needles, it's good to identify where that has happened, so that you can let a vet know so they can either pull that needle out, or when you're taking it to an abattoir, they know where this needle is. Also, too, an animal identification, what tag it is, how can you tell which animal got treated, withdrawal date. And again, these are just some of the simple things that you can record. You can put more information, put more information into this type of a record or less, maybe not too much less. But again, you can have it as flexible as you need it in your operation. And one, as I mentioned earlier, these are just two kind of main record keeping examples so you can use in your livestock operation. There's plenty more for you to record. As they say, if it's performance, like again, in the dairy operation, by having records of how these cows, how the different cows are performing, how much milk are they producing, if there's any sort of issues with mastitis or whatnot. Again, each operation is so different, and you can quite literally do whatever type of record keeping as you want. So, so that's why I just picked these two, but again, sky's the limit. So switching gears, we'll look at cost production. So again, if you listen to the presentation last week, you'll hear some of the same things again. I believe cost of production is a very important tool in any sort of farmer's toolkit. So the cost of production, the idea is to determine what is your selling price of your livestock, what is your break-even selling price, and then what is your cost. So, and when you're dealing with livestock, you're most likely going to deal with cost per head. In terms of like dairy, you might be looking at cost per liter of milk produced. Eggs, it might be number of eggs produced per head. Quite literally, it can change depending on your operation. And again, the idea is to determine, you know, as you say, how else would you determine if you're making profit or making money if you don't know what your true cost is? So that's where the cost production comes into play here. And you can break down your cost production based on your variable cost and your fixed costs. So some of the examples of variable costs can include commission. So if you're selling an animal through an auction market, the auction market will usually take, well, not usually, they will take a commission. If they don't charge you commission, that's a darn good auction market, but I can guarantee you there is a commission that they will charge. Any sort of tags, so identification tags, RFID tags, and we'll get talking about RFID tags a little bit later on. Labor, any sort of vaccination or medicine costs, those are your variable costs, where your fixed costs are associated with, you know, doesn't matter how much you produce, it's still going to be the exact same cost. So like property taxes, hydro, telephone, interest, doesn't really matter what how much livestock you're working with. The reality is that the property taxes are going to stay the same, or the hydro is going to stay the same, or at least relatively the same. Those are the differences when it comes to it. In terms of cost of production, again, you should do this on a yearly basis. But again, it really depends on your operation. So again, if you're dealing with buying, again, focusing on cattle, if you're buying cattle at 500 pounds and then you're going to sell them at 700 pounds, most likely you're going to get them sold within 6 months. So doing a cost production after each or during each flip or cycle would make a lot more sense in that operation. Whereas when you're coming to livestock that is going through from beginning to market weight or to the abattoir, then cost production might be done on an annual basis, right? There are numerous resources available that can help you complete cost production. First is the guide to the cost production budgeting fact sheet. You'll see the link on your screen there. And then there's also the farm business decision calculators. And in that case, there is a livestock section that you can then use to go through and choose whatever livestock you're looking at. And then you can fill in the Excel spreadsheet, and then it will help you determine what's your cost production, and then also look at, you know, your best case, worst case, and normal case, or your break-even case in terms of how to sell or what your selling prices should be. So moving on to marketing your livestock. So like everything else, selling your livestock is a very important task to your farm business, because ultimately you have to make money. It would be nice that you wouldn't have to worry about selling livestock, but the reality is that there's mortgages to be paid, there's input supplies that have to be paid, feed, your time, your labor. So ultimately, in order for you to make money, you have to sell some livestock. So how do you determine what's your best options for marketing your livestock? Really depends on your situation. So a couple of things I want to mention before we get too in depth on this topic. Tonight, I'm not going to talk about any sort of direct farm marketing or selling any sort of livestock directly to the consumer. That's going to be next week. So just a little tease there for that, a little plug in for next week's seminar. And then also I will mention that the most common method to selling any sort of livestock when you're dealing with the meat market is usually through an auction market or working directly with a food processor. I realize that some of you maybe not of a may not be able to have access to selling directly to a food processor. So we're not going to really talk too much about that. And then the auction market, if anybody has any specific questions, you can raise them. But we will talk about your different marketing options throughout this section of the presentation. Also, too, when it comes to supply managed commodities, and I don't think I heard anybody talking about looking at getting involved into, the dairy or the poultry sector at the beginning of the presentation. But just quickly, when it comes to supply managed commodities, the reality is that the marketing's already done for you. It's done through your commodity organization, and they are the ones that are your in between they will dictate, where your product will be going to, which food processor and whatnot. So your options are very limited under supply managed commodity, not to the same extent as the non-supply managed. So like the beef, the pigs, the sheep, the goats, etc. So, and again, so we're just going to look at a few different marketing options. And then, as I mentioned, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat box, and then we'll get them answered. So first one's more so focusing on the pig world, the hog world. So assembly yards and licensed hog marketers. So if you're planning on raising any pigs, and I don't think anybody had put that down in the chat if they were going to do that, but again, if you do decide, in most cases when if you're in the hog sector, if you have to be large enough that you have to work directly with a food processor, so like the Conestoga Meat Packers or Sofina down in Burlington. Those are kind of your two major hog processing plants. But if you're not of the size where if you're just planning on doing 100 pigs or less, this is where an assembly yard or a licensed hog marketer would come into play and work with you to contract those pigs, and then ultimately their role is to kind of do a mix and match type program, and your pigs might get mixed with other pigs, and then ultimately it could be 2 or 3 or 4 different farmers that might be supplying pigs for that truckload that's going to a processing plant. And so they're kind of, the matchmaker in determining who goes where and when. One additional comment I will make very briefly, there might be additional fees depending on the assembly yard or the licensed hog marketer that you're using, just because of the fact that, again, it does take some work on their part to arrange the loads, to work with different farmers to get those loads filled and ultimately sent to a food processor. One thing I will mention very briefly before I move off on this topic, assembly yards, depending on your experience, they were a very big thing around Ontario at one point in time. They're becoming less and less, and I think from an Ontario pork standpoint, I think they're moving more towards a licensed hog marketer. So just keep that in mind. If you do want to get a list of assembly yards or licensed hog marketers, go to Ontario Pork's website and search for a licensed hog marketer, and then they'll have a list of the different options available to you and your farm business. Next on the list is cow-calf clubs and special calf sales. So the idea of cow-calf clubs and special calf sales is for farmers or cow-calf producers to follow a certain regime in terms of conditioning their calves, so that ultimately when they get entered into a special sale, that the buyers are more comfortable in buying those calves and may offer a premium to you as the farmer. So a couple of things: special calf sales usually only happen a few times of the year, and they usually happen either the springtime or the fall time, depending on the situation. Especially in Great Bruce counties, the main time for special calf sales are in the fall. So you're looking at that October, November period, maybe December. But there are a few sales that are happening now that are special for the special calf sales, and they're getting ready to go into that spring swing of cattle buying. So as you say, the idea of selling your calves through a cow-calf club or a special calf sale is that the buyer ultimately knows kind of what the regime of that animal is. So has it been vaccinated? How long it has been weaned? Depending on, how the castration processes were, etc. So it really depends on which cow-calf club that you sign up with, or special calf sale that you work in. But ultimately, it's just it's a good way for the buyer to understand your what you have done to that calf, what you have done to make that calf be that much better in the next farmer's operation. Back in 2019, OMAFRA did do some research on the benefits of the cow-calf clubs and special calf sales. You can go onto that website on your screen there, and you can read through that report. It's quite well done, and does explain in quite detailed fashion about the true benefits of these cow-calf clubs and special calf sales. So, so keep that in mind. Next option is third-party quality assurance certifications. So I put down 3 here for you to peruse. So Ontario corn-fed beef, Trillium lamb producers, and verified beef production plus, I should say. So again, very similar to a special calf sale, but the idea is that by participating in these programs, you are following good record keeping. You're making sure that all your treatment records are kept up to date and are accurate. And ultimately, the idea for these types of certifications are to get a premium for when you take those animals, those market animals, to a food processor. So again, there are rules in place for you to participate in these programs. So you'll want to reach out to whichever third-party quality assurance program that you're interested in. And then you can see if that's a good fit. And then ultimately, if you can make a few extra dollars per head, that will help your bottom line. And ultimately, the more profitable you are, the better off you will ultimately be. So one additional comment I will make very briefly is that depending on the third-party quality assurance programs that you're working with, may also determine which food processor you might be working with. Some of them may have a specific food processor that they work with on a regular basis. Others may not, so just keep that in mind. One comment I will make is the verified beef production plus. You may have heard about the Sustainable Beef Roundtable, and I believe if you were to sell any market cattle to Cargill and Guelph, you might get I believe you do get a premium. I'm not too sure how much the premium is, but if you are part of the verified beef production plus, and I also believe the Ontario corn-fed beef program as well, you would get a premium if you do sell your livestock to your cattle to Cargill and Guelph, just as a quick example. So we're getting close to the end of the presentation. So just a couple more topics that I just want to talk about very briefly. So first is commodity organizations. So if you've heard about the first, if you heard the first part of the presentation, about the general aspects of starting a farm, I talked about accredited farm organizations. So I won't go into too much detail about that. So please take the time and read, either read this, look at the slides or listen to the presentation. Otherwise, the commodity organizations are meant to focus on specific commodities, and most commodities are represented by an organization, and they are overseen by the Ontario Farm Products Marketing Commission, and ultimately the Farm Products Marketing Commission administers the legislation that they are governed by. But going back to, you know, commodity organizations and yourself, the idea of a commodity organization, they're there to provide support. So if it's providing, completing research on different ways to increase your daily gains or reduce risks from any sort of diseases, or via trials, the commodity organizations, one of the big things will be to promote and market your commodity into the public sphere. They will collect checkoff fees. So if you are planning on selling any sort of livestock, be prepared for a dollar or two, or depending on the situation, to be deducted from that sale. That will get remitted back to the commodity organization to help fund, as I say, research, marketing efforts, as well as the commodity organizations will provide market information for you as a farmer, as well as any sort of government advocacy. So one additional aspect of the commodity organization that is not, that the crop side of your farm operation would not necessarily see, is traceability. Traceability is starting to become more and more of a bigger aspect in livestock. It's starting to show in the crop parts, the crop sector as well, but not to the same extent. So depending on the commodity organization that you're working with, I should say, will determine on what type of traceability requirements and products that they are offering to their farmer members. So some options are radio frequency identification tags, or RFID. The idea of an RFID tag is it provides a unique number to each animal that ultimately get registered in a database. And the idea is that if something goes wrong, if there's an issue with a specific animal, then that animal will be identified, who the owner was, from which farm it came from, and then if there's any issues, then they can quickly address those issues. Also, too, depending on the commodity organization, are movement reporting requirements. So the idea is that when livestock move from one farm or operation to another farm or operation, or an abattoir, you should be recording the movement of that livestock. This is really big in the pig sector and the hog sector, but you'll start seeing more and more of that most likely in the other sectors, the beef, the sheep, the goats sector. So it's just something that's on the horizon. So as I mentioned there, reach out to your different commodity organizations and determine what traceability requirements are you expected to follow when you start getting involved in the different livestock sector. So here's just a quick example or quick list of the different commodity organizations that you might be utilizing. You can look at that at your own time. This is a mix of both supplied managed and non-supplied managed livestock operations, commodity organizations. But if you don't see your commodity on here, that does not mean that there's no organization there for you. You may just have to do some research.
Eric, Chloe in the chat says, with the Verified Beef Production Plus program, the animal has to be in the program its whole life, calf through to slaughter, to get the premium.
Yeah. So, and that's as I mentioned, that, you know, if you want to go into those programs, you have to make sure you understand the whole idea of it. So so right there, that's a pretty if you're not a cow-calf producer, then verified beef production may not be your best option for a third-party quality assurance program.
Thank you.
I believe we're definitely getting close to the end. So we're going to look at the business risk management programs, I should say. So very quickly, as I mentioned, so this one is more so for crops. There's no livestock component to production insurance. As I mentioned, as livestock producers, you're going to have some form of crops on your farm to feed your livestock. Idea of production insurance is to protect insured farmers from any yield reductions due to insured perils. So that's weather, disease, pests. You'll pay a premium based on a guaranteed production and what the market price is. And if you ever are in a situation where your yield is below your guaranteed production, then you're eligible for a claim payment. So just keep that in mind. For more information about production insurance, you can click on the link there. For a livestock operation, one of the production insurance programs that are out there is forage rainfall insurance program. So that's determining if you're in a situation where you're in a drought, you might receive a claim payment because you didn't receive enough rain to make enough hay or forage for your livestock. So it's not just on corn, soybean, wheat crops. It can be also there are production insurance programs for forage crops as well. So just keep that in mind.
Are there livestock specific production insurance programs? Because I think that I've heard, yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead, Emily.
Oh, I think that I've heard it talked about just in the sheep industry, like, people are always saying, we need this, we got to work on this, why don't we have this kind of thing? Are there programs that have started?
So that's a good question. So I know that's been a topic of discussion for, I think, like 20 years now about production insurance for livestock. I know in the Western provinces, I believe there are some programs out there for like production insurance programs for livestock, but nothing in Ontario as of yet, or at least not to my knowledge. With that being said, it's been one of those situations where it's been talked about quite vigorously. Whether or not it's going to happen or when it's going to happen, that's $1 million question, right? So I don't have that answer for you, but it's definitely a good question. So keep an eye out. If there are any sort of production insurance programs that do come out for livestock commodities, you will see it on Agricorp's website. And now, because of the risk management program for livestock, they do have access to farmers who are in the livestock world. And I would hope that they would reach out directly with livestock farmers if there is those types of production insurance programs. So as I mentioned, so the risk management program for livestock, or RMP livestock, it is an insured program or insurable program that only focuses on when commodity prices are below the average cost production. So it's just focusing on price differences. So ultimately, Agricorp will calculate what the average cost production using information from industry partners. And as I mentioned, it's similar to production insurance, whereas farmers will have to pay a premium to participate in RMP livestock, and the premium is based on how much you're going to insure and what coverage level you're going to insure. So just keep that in mind. New farmers, you have to apply to participate in this program. So by reaching out to Agricorp, you'll be able to apply and then start the process of submitting quarterly or semi-annual reports on your livestock sales, and then they will take that information, do the calculation, determine if you're in a claim position, and if you are, you'll receive a claim check. So when it comes to risk management program for livestock, there are different sections for different aspects of different livestock. So there is a section for cattle, hogs, sheep, and veal. I'm sad to say that if you're not on that list, if the livestock that you're looking at is not on this list, you do not have, this program's not available to you. But with that being said, I know RMP is they constantly reviewing the program, and if there's enough of a demand for your commodity or your livestock, then you might see that coming up down the road. Agri-stability is another big business risk management program available to you. So the idea of agri-stability, it's supposed to protect farmers from large declines in their income due to production loss or market conditions. So it's kind of the best of both worlds with risk management program and production insurance. To calculate your farm income, there are allowable and non-allowable income and expenses. You can see on your screen there what are some of the allowable and non-allowable options there are. So just keep that in mind that that there are some aspects of your farm operation that will not affect your farming income in the eyes of agri-stability. If you want more information about agri-stability, the link is at the bottom of your screen there, or you can just Google agri-stability in Ontario, and then that'll take you to the proper page. Agri-invest, so it's a savings account, so it's the same idea. Agri-invest and agri-stability, as I mentioned last week's presentation for crops, it's the same for livestock. So again, it's a savings account where farmers would make a deposit, and the government will then match the deposit depending on the farmer's allowable net sales. Funds in Agri-invest can be used to help mitigate risks that you as a farmer might be facing. There's no real threshold that you have to meet as to when you can withdraw any money. So you have that option to withdraw that money at any time, or you can save it for another day depending on your situation. So allowable net sales is based on the sales and the expenses of any non-supply managed commodities. So if you're looking at dairy or poultry, you will not necessarily be able to participate in the Agri-invest program, or at least not for the dairy aspect of your farm operation or the poultry aspect of your operation. And again, if you would like more information, there's a link on your screen there that you can go, or just as you say, Google Agri-invest, and it'll take you to the right program for you to review the rules and regulations. So very quickly, some of the resources and just a quick summary. So we have some time for any questions or comments at the end of the presentation. So there are some resources available to you as a new farmer. So Publication 61, which is created by OMAFRA, and that's starting a farm in Ontario. You can see the link there on your screen. There's also a Starting a Farm in Ontario Business Information Bundle. So that is a combination of different web pages, as well as fact sheets, info sheets that OMAFRA has that we found that you as a new farmer would find quite interested in reading, as well as the Farm Management Canada, FMC as they're called. They also have some resources available to you for you to review to help you get started in farming. Also too, depending on your commodity organization, they will have some additional resources. I know to like to pick on Ontario Pork tonight. They do have a document or a publication for starting a small pig herd. So that's just one example. So if you're interested, reach out to your commodity organization that you're looking at going into. So if it's beef, cattle, or beef, dairy, poultry, sheep, goats, etc., They may have different resources, and they may be able to connect you with other farmers that are either new to the commodity, or maybe they'll be able to connect you to some more experienced farmers so that you can pick their brains and see what's the best option, or prevent any pitfalls that you might face. So finally, we're at the end of the presentation. So as I mentioned a few times, entering the agriculture and livestock industry can be quite daunting, but to help get you into it, make sure you do your research. Take the time to figure out which livestock option you want to go into. As you said, if it's beef or dairy or chicken, or if it's sheep or goat or hogs or pigs, take the time, do the research, assess whether or not that's something that you are interested in involving in, participating in, I should say. I know this is a comment I made in my general remarks. Make sure you have a written business plan. That's the easiest, I wouldn't say it's the easiest, but it's the best tool to help you go through this type of a process of starting a new business. So take the time, reach out to your different advisors, and get it as flushed out as possible, because ultimately it's your guiding light to be a successful farmer. Make sure you determine what's the best option to market your livestock. As I mentioned, there are multiple different options available for you. So just make sure you take the time and figure out what's the best option for your operation. Give yourself enough time to obtain financing. And as I mentioned previously, use your advisors to help you get started. They're there to provide advice and provide you information so that you can make those key and important decisions that you'll be facing when you're getting started in this industry. So with that being said, thank you very much. If now it's time for questions.